Hello there. Sunak is under enormous pressure, both politically and economically. Ex-Prime Ministers Liz Truss and Boris Johnson are attacking their ailing successor and flirting with a comeback. I talked about this in the morning already. In the UK, former Prime Ministers usually end up in the backbenches of the House of Commons in Westminster after their resignation. And that's where are three of them right now. They are then eyed suspiciously by their successors and taken more or less seriously. The incumbent British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has, as I said, three ousted predecessors from his own Conservative Party breathing down his neck, and two of them could pose a threat to him. The incumbent Prime Minister has little to fear from Theresa May, who already resigned in 2019. Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, on the other hand, are two political zombies, currently unelected parliamentarians who directly or indirectly blame Sunak for their loss of power. However, both ex-prime ministers also have ambitions to significantly influence the political course of Great Britain again. Yeah, they do. And Johnson has repeatedly set points against Sunak in recent weeks. He called for more tanks for Ukraine and more growth and less taxes for the British. And he went to Kiev and Washington and so on. And Truss, on the other hand, indirectly criticizes Sunak. In the Conservative Parliamentary Group, a growth group has already been formed under Truss supporter Simon Clarke, which feels committed to the ideas of the would-be Thatcher heiress. Even Tory grandees like former Brexit negotiator David Frost are flirting with Truss ideas, which, according to Frost, the ex-Prime Minister was only too hasty to push through. And this could become another problem for Sunak, who is already battered by scandals and the economic crisis, and his flight schedule, as I learned today. With their renewed calls for tax cuts, struck a chord with many of the Tories who fear for their seats in Parliament, given the poor poll numbers, and who consider their Prime Minister's fiscal stability course to be far too discouraged and inhibit growth. Pressure from within the party for a course correction has increased after the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, published growth figures last week. Of all the major industrial nations, including Russia, the British are expected to have the weakest figure for gross domestic product, so GDP, at minus 0.6% over this year. Over the weekend, Truss delivered her 4,000-word memoir of her 49-day tenure in a guest post for Conservative heartbeat The Telegraph. Instead of asking forgiveness from her crisis-ridden compatriots for the chaos of her Trussonomics of unfounded tax cuts, she claimed that her economic and financial policies failed not because of reality, but because of the powerful economic establishment. Ooh, the ghost in the back. Well, the non-partisan Office for Budget Responsibility, the OBR, wanted to put her in a fiscal straitjacket, she said. Its own finance ministry suffers from chronic pessimism, and she too made mistakes. But when I entered Downing Street, I assumed that my mandate would be respected and accepted. How wrong I was. Who did she think she became? The Queen? Her party did not support her sufficiently from her point of view. With her ideas of low taxes and deregulations, she had to swim against the international tide and was also criticized by the IMF and US President Joe Biden. Yeah, rightly so. Although she did not name her successor Sunak, she openly denounces his and Chancellor of the Exchequer Jeremy Hunt's decision to largely reverse her tax cut plans. On Monday evening, in an interview with the conservative magazine The Spectator, she did it again. I mentioned that this morning. No, she doesn't want to be Prime Minister again, but she wants to fight for her ideas, Truss said. She criticized the fact that independent think tanks like the OBR, with their economic forecasts, restricted the room for maneuver of elected governments. We are basically being told what we can do, said the former Prime Minister, referring to revenue and spending decisions. Well, yes, reality does limit you. She blamed not only the left-wing orthodoxy of the business establishment for the abrupt end of her term after just 49 days, but also the market turmoil in so-called liability-driven investments, which use pension funds to cover their obligations. We didn't know about those risks, Truss said. Yeah, but then your government was not very competent then. The response to the comeback attempt came promptly. Business Secretary Grant Shapps, who served under Truss, countered that the former PM had failed to tackle the country's structural problems, such as high inflation and public debt. So Sunak now is under enormous pressure, both politically and economically. His Finance Minister Hunt has already ruled out tax cuts in his proposed budget for mid-March. And Hunt also recently presented a growth plan, which was criticized by business and economists as far too vague. While the general theme is encouraging, the details are lacking, particularly in the area of education. That was said by Jagjit Chadha, director of the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, or NISE. And we know this from the Tories to be vague. And at the same time, Truss and Johnson sense their second chance here. Both recently traveled to the United States and were ensnared there by ultra-conservative Republicans and also by think tanks. Truss for her neoliberal economic policies, Johnson for his unreserved support for Ukraine against Russia. With both coming from the right wing of the party, sooner or later the question will arise as to who should lead the internal opposition within the Tories. Sunak might then have one opponent less, but it will not make it any easier for him. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.